Hey everyone, welcome to Business Unchained, where entrepreneurs and business owners come together to power up on their journey to greatness.
Bobby Masha is the founder and CEO of Greenridge Wealth Planning. All opinions expressed by Bobby and his guests are solely their own and do not reflect the opinion of Greenridge Wealth Planning. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon for any financial decisions. Clients of Greenridge Wealth Planning may maintain positions in any securities discussed in this podcast.
Let's hit this road running.
All right, very good. So, Bobby, one of the key components that we talk about when we talk about culture is that human behavior does not occur in a vacuum. It occurs in a context. And when you change the context of human behavior, behavior follows. So, how did I learn this? It's 1992. I'm standing in a prison cell. The reason? Not important. You're looking in the cell right here. The first thing you notice is
Wait. You're sitting in a prison cell?
Yes,
What'd
I'm
you do?
sitting in a prison cell. Hey,
is this a learned lesson or is this,
There is a lesson along the way. So imagine you're staring in the prison cell door right here.
Okay.
First thing you would see is I'm leaning up against the stainless steel sink that's bolted to the cinder block wall behind me. Across from me on that wall, you would see a set of steel bunk beds. On the lower bunk, you would see sitting Tony, staring up at the space with a forlorn look on his face. Tony's a mafia capo, which means he is a family member who ran a crew, and he's incarcerated for conspiracy and murder. Tony's very upset because his wife has decided to leave him, and there's very little he can do sitting inside that prison cell. As Tony and I are having a conversation, all of a sudden I hear, rap, rap, rap. It's a body alarm. A special radio that's carried by corrections officers, which is activated when they're in danger or distress. I hear body alarm. Being curious, I step outside the cell, turn right, and go running towards the common area in the center of the unit, where I hear this alarm's clearly been activated. As I get to the end of the range, the line of cells where the cells meets the common area, I pause, just for a second, to figure out what's going on here. Why was this body alarm activated? What I see is a full-out inmate brawl. Inmates are swinging chairs like sledgehammers, throwing pool balls like snowballs, using pool cues like baseball bats.
In front of you?
Right in front of me, absolutely. Full inmate brawl. I remember having two very clear and distinct thoughts. The first, oh shit, Taki mushrooms.
You can say shit here, that's okay. You're in good company.
The second, this is the time when inmates settle scores. This is when people die in prison. The very next thing I remember, I felt an arm coming over my shoulder, across my chest and gripping me by the left armpit. I felt the weight of a full-grown adult male, more than 200 pounds, pulling me back and down towards the ground.
That must have scared the shiitake mushrooms out of you.
That's exactly right. And I had no idea who this was. I had no time other than to put my arms behind me and brace for what I know was going to be a brutal impact. That impact never came. The next thing I knew, I was seated on the ground, surrounded by 8 of Tony's foot soldiers. Mobsters, all made men with a history of murder. All at once, these made men were holding me back, shielding me from flying debris, and most importantly, keeping other inmates from approaching me. They were protecting me, doing everything they could to keep me from being harmed.
That's crazy.
It is, isn't it? Why? Why were they protecting me?
Because you're a made man as well. No, go ahead.
Not close. For the record, I've never been a made man. At the time, I was working very closely with Tony. Tony was actually quite suicidal, which means he genuinely wanted to take his own life. So it became my job to keep him from doing that, which simply means in the course of simply doing my job for Tony, for his foot soldiers, and for the family, I had changed the context. And when you change the context of human behavior, behavior follows. And just to be clear, when that brawl broke out, I did not ask those mobsters to protect me. I did not pay them to protect me. I did not teach them to protect me. I protected me because they protected me because the context of the situation demanded it of them. That is the power of context.
So what do you mean by the context changed?
The context is the environment and the meaning we give that environment. So for others, I was a fed For those mobsters, I was a Fed. They should have, like they would have for any other Fed, step back, do nothing, let the chips fall where they may. But they didn't because of the work I was doing with Tony. And the context means part of what we talk about. I was able to build a genuine relationship with them. They were able to trust me because I always delivered what I said I would deliver and I showed up on time. I had a genuine interest in keeping Tony alive, and I never promised them things I wouldn't deliver.
So you were protecting him from himself.
That's exactly right.
And thereby you were being protected because that was your connection to the family.
I was the only thing that was keeping him alive. He genuinely wanted to take his own life, and they knew it. And really interesting part that I don't talk about in presentations because we don't have time. The guy on my back was Tony. Tony was the one. He's the one who pulled me back into safety, and his people were surrounding both of us. In other words, he was willing to take his own life, but he didn't want anybody to take mine. He led the whole thing.
So, this is a real treat because, most of the time we have business owners that are kind of going through their struggles. They're talking about some of their, the twists and turns that they've gone down in the road of entrepreneurialism and how they made their way out the other side, lessons learned, et cetera, et cetera. This is a special treat because you and I met. You were speaking to a group, right, and I was fortunate enough to come and talk to you afterward and rope you on to coming into the show. And what really got me was one of the things that I attribute the success of my business to, and both of my businesses to, is the culture of the firm that we've been able to create. And culture to me is such a, it's such an ambiguous, but such a specific thing at the same time, because there's just so much depth and complexity to how you build a culture. And I love the conversation that we had. So I was hoping to, to share that with the audience, because I think that there's a lot of value that can be brought here in learning a little bit about putting your culture in context of your goals and some of the work that you do. So I really appreciate you coming on, and this should be exciting.
Bobby, from our first conversation, I knew that you had stellar culture in your organizations. You put culture first. It's what I tell entrepreneurs and other CEOs. I tell them culture comes first. That is the one thing they need to worry about. So, I talk about culture like a garden. The leaders are responsible for preparing the soil, planting the seeds, and picking the fruit of our culture. What that really means is we get the culture we create, we get the culture we cultivate, we get the culture we deserve. A lot of leaders don't want to hear that, but you get the culture you deserve because how much time you spend in your garden. If you ignore your garden for a week, what do you get? Weeds. Yeah. That's exactly right.
So, I just find it super interesting because we talk about, even when you talk about just the word culture and the atmosphere and the feeling that you have for the employees that come to work, for your customers or clients that are engaging with you, it is that feeling. One of the things with culture is whether or not you think you have a culture or you're pushing a certain culture, you have one by default if you're at the top and you're not leading the culture in the direction that you want it to go in. So I'd love to also kind of peel back the layer of that onion to get into the depths of how do you start to look at the current state of affairs in your business and whether or not your culture in your mind is a 10 or it's a 2. How do you start to ask yourself some of the hard questions that even if you think your culture is a 10, reality, you can go further?
Let's start by demystifying it. To your point, a lot of people think culture is an amorphous thing. They're not sure what it is. So it's not just my definition. This is the psychology/anthropology definition of culture. Because culture, while a lot of people think it's amorphous, it's been very well studied in both psychology and anthropology and other disciplines. Here's definition. Culture is the context in which we live and work, including our beliefs, behavioral rules, traditions, and rituals. So these are the 4 components of culture. Beliefs are simply the way we see the world. And one of the things I speak about a lot is when you change the way you see the world you see changes. Behavioral rules are the rules that govern our behavior. Traditions and rituals are simply things we do repeatedly. So when we talk with entrepreneurs, we talk about your culture in your organization. We also talk about if you're large enough to have departments or different offices, you are going to get subcultures, but large organizations have subcultures. And we focus on alignment of those subcultures because subcultures are naturally occurring. So the issue is, if you look at those definitions, it's the beliefs, how you see the world, what's important to you. People often say, well, Gustavo, where are values? How come values isn't part of your definition? Values are a type of belief. That's all they are. They're beliefs that we hold in priority over other beliefs. So beliefs, what do you believe? What do you value? Your behavioral rules should come from those beliefs. So those beliefs determine what are the rules, how do we behave, what are the required behaviors, and what are the behaviors that are excluded. Both are important. And traditions and rituals are simply things we do repeatedly. So the way the culture develops, especially as an entrepreneur, most entrepreneurs, if they start by themselves or they start with somebody else, there is an agreed upon set of beliefs of why they're doing what they're doing. And those beliefs inform the behavioral rules. Given these beliefs, this is how we must behave. Those behaviors being repeated become traditions and rituals. So, and as people come on, you bring people more onto your business success, a thriving business, then it's really about teaching them and them teaching each other that this is the way we do things.
What do you see as like I would say the biggest misstep that business owners take when they look at the culture of their business? Even just peeling back beliefs, the rituals, behaviors, where do you find that the biggest opportunity people can find is in this space that they're most deficient in?
So number one is clarity, meaning they don't have well-defined behavioral rules. They feel, to your point, some people are like, I've heard this, I'm guessing you have too. Oh, well, you know what? My culture takes care of itself, or I know what my culture is. And let me come back to your earlier points. Like sometimes you think your culture's up here when in reality it's down here. That's referred to as a culture gap. So what you think your culture is and what the culture really is, that distance is referred to as a culture gap. And I say this tongue in cheek, but depending on the size of organizations, it's really true. Middle management is where culture goes to die. Very often, working with entrepreneurs, many of them have some very sophisticated understanding of the power of culture, and they believe in culture and they want to invest in culture, and they pass that task, they delegate that task to middle managers.
Yeah, you can't delegate that out.
My point is this.
Well, you can, unless you don't want to be the one who really dictates what the culture is like. If you want to hand that off to somebody, which is a huge responsibility.
It is, and they have to be up at your level. They have to be reporting to you. So I can give you an example of Steve Jobs, former CEO of Apple, very difficult person to work for, and he knew it. He brought in Tim Cook as his title was COO, Chief Operating Officer, but his role was CCO, Chief Culture Officer. So you can delegate it, but you have to be willing to allow everything to go through your CCO, because all decisions at executive levels are going to affect your culture.
Well, I've noticed a number of things, and I'll probably miss a few, but in this culture creation, to me, it was number one, you have a lot of people who go to work, and on Sunday, they have anxiety because they don't want Monday to start. And the number one thing that I wanted to make sure was that, and my wife used to call it the Sunday scaries, because she used to be a guidance counselor, and she'd be like, the Sunday scaries, I really just don't want to go to work. Because post-COVID, things got really difficult. And the culture of that board of ed, I think just the board of eds around in general, if they faced a lot of difficulty, it was tougher for her. And the one thing that I wanted out of my culture was I wanted everybody to be excited. I wanted Monday to be an energizing day, not a demotivating day. Like, here we go again, rinse and repeat. So when I looked at culture, I was like, okay, I want to make sure people love to come to work. I want to make sure that people feel open, that they can share their ideas and they can collaborate, but also understanding that that comes with some organization, and it's not just a free-flowing brainstorming session. Like, we actually have to get to work and implement on some things. We can't just always be thinking. I wanted to make sure that our clients felt like they were part of the family. I wanted them to feel like they were being handheld, that there was a real white glove service above and beyond just a professional level. I wanted them to feel like we were like old shoes, comfortable, you look forward to putting them on. Like, it was just like we wanted it to be that kind of relationship. So there are different elements that I wanted, and I figured that ultimately the end result would be I would get better employees, they'd stay longer, clients would be happy, they would refer us, we'd make more money, and the money business part of it would just come if I did all of the culture things correctly.
Yeah.
And it really worked.
You are articulating what I refer to as the profit paradox, which is companies that pursue profit directly, they put profit first, make less. Companies that put culture first make more. In other words, culture is the vehicle to profit, which is exactly what you're saying. You focus on the culture and the profit follows. Absolutely. That's the profit paradox.
So, Doc, funny, I'll tell you, well, maybe it's not a funny story, but Greenridge was humming. Like, we were doing really well. And my father, we unfortunately lost him about 2.5 years ago.
I'm sorry for your loss.
Thank you. And I took over his business, bought it out from my mother. My sisters, my brother-in-law are all part of the organization. And one of the things I said is, we're going to flip this thing on top of its head. My dad was very old school, kind of like that traditional capitalist that was making money, pinching pennies, shortcuts. He was very successful.
Top-down management, command and control.
Mm-hmm. In my dad's office, every room had a sign, Tommy needs to know everything. Wow. And first thing I did, and he was still alive when he had asked me to kind of take things and move them forward. And we weren't sure if we were going to sell the business or we're going to keep the business. But the first thing I did, I said, Dad, listen, I'm running my own business. So if I'm going to do it, it's going to be my way. And I can't have anything getting in the way of that, or else I can't do what I need to do. And he agreed. And the first thing I did was I took all those signs down. And through the process of making this huge, monumental shift, he had passed away. Mm-hmm. And after he had passed was when I really started to put my money where my mouth is in terms of changing the culture. And the amount of money that I spent would have been sickening to him. If cancer didn't get him, this would have got him. Right. For an entire year, if I were to say I didn't wake up 3 or 4 times in the middle of the night with anxiety that my dad was still alive and coming to me and saying, what did you do to my company? What are you doing? Right. I'd be lying to you. Yeah. And we went through what I went through, a very painful year of having to, really believe that what I was doing was the right thing, but still waiting for the results, because the results don't come right away.
Exactly right.
People have to fall and embrace and adapt and start to live and breathe this new culture. And the new culture was really, we always talked about the customer comes first for years. Customer comes first. Drop whatever you're doing. Customer comes first. First thing I said when we had our all management meeting was, that is done. No longer does the customer come first. Write it on a piece of paper, crumple it up, throw it in the garbage. The customer is not first anymore. And everyone looked at me like I had 4 heads.
Right.
I said, you come first. Our people come first.
Nice.
And we did, as part of the reorganization, we did career pathing, bonus compensation, incentive programs. We really kind of recarved how we deal with employees and how we dealt with the general operations of the company.
Can I just jump in? Let me ask one question, because I think you're putting your fingers on the pulse of something that many people are often ask me. Tell me about the resistance you got during the period of transition.
Oh my God.
Even though you knew it was good for them, even though they thought it might be good for them, tell me about the resistance you got.
So I will tell the resistance. I'm going to finish with my last piece of story, which was when I got the P&Ls after our 4th quarter, and we had the best 4th quarter we've ever had, and it's been the best ever since. Mm-hmm. The nightmare stopped. So that profit paradox it's a real thing. And the resistance that I got was tremendous, because there were people for years who were embedded and they were taught on how to cut corners, how to pinch pennies. My dad used to say this is this is a nickel profit business. Like, we have to watch every nickels because that's our profit.
Right.
And while that's true, there's a bigger picture. That is the very micro version, as opposed to the bigger vision, which is a macro version in terms of the entire organization and keeping it running. So the first management meeting that I had, which my dad didn't have management meetings, but I rented out a banquet hall and I had it fully catered, and people were like, all right, we're either selling this thing and we're all fired. Like, this is going to be, this. And people came in and they looked like they were in mourning. And
they were afraid. They were afraid.
Oh, they were petrified. And, part of me was like, I wanted to grab them and be like, it's okay. It's all right. Everything's going to be great. But the other part of me was laughing because I'm like, oh, they don't even know what they're in for.
Right.
And we had so one of the things that I needed to really make sure I did was have those key individuals that were really going to be helping to be that champion, that cheerleader of the new culture, to keep the consistency, because as CEO of two different businesses, I can't be all things to all people. I needed to have the right people in place. So my brother-in-law, when I pitched the idea to him, at first he was like, I don't know how this is going to work. And it took a couple of months of really, trying to get him on board. And he was like, I'm in. Let's go. I'm in. Let's do it. I said, okay, but we need now two people below us. We have one who's a smaller partner that we need to convince this is the right way, and we're going to bring in an outside party. So I brought in an outside party that shared the same sort of vision with me. It was someone who was tied to the Dunkin' brand, who I had known for a couple of years, and I knew that the same things that he was trying to do for all franchisees as a business consultant for the Dunkin' brand was the same thing that I wanted to do, plus. So when he came in for the interview, and I had talked to Dunkin' to make sure that I wasn't poaching somebody from him. So,
right.
Because again, culture extends behind the four walls. If you're dealing with an outside party,
100%.
you want to make sure that you're keeping good, a good relationship.
Yeah.
But I brought him in and I said, listen, you're in for a little bit of a fight, but we're going to have fun with it. And the business partner that we had to convert, he was like, listen, I trust you. I'm in for the ride. You tell me what I got to do, and I'm just going to do it. And you could tell that he was like, oh God, this is the worst fucking thing. This kid, he has no idea what he's up against.
Right.
And within 3 months of behaviors, right, we were having frequent daily calls. We were talking about the engagement that we were going to do. I was getting them amped up about the changes that we were going to implement. We were talking about just case studies of why this can work, how this can work. And all of a sudden the energy started to go from resistance, doubt, questioning what is it that we're actually doing and spending, to now it's like, oh no, this could be great. Now they didn't know how it was going to really end up against the bottom line, but I had to tell them, hey, listen, don't worry about the bottom line right now. Right. That's my concern. Your concern are these KPIs. Your concern are these metrics. Your concern are how you're going to implement these new initiatives and dealing with the people and, helping to encourage and nurture them. It took 12 months.
You're right on target. It took 12 months. You said it was the fourth quarter it became profitable. There's your 12 months. But I say 12 to 18 months because sometimes it takes longer.
It's improving. It improved the next 6 months. It improved the 6 months after. And the things that we're looking to implement now are things that never would have even come into their periphery ever.
Right, because you're building on top of what precedes it. You're building on top. It's a construction. I want to talk because your point of resistance is so critical, because you took over a company. Again, a lot of entrepreneurs will either build their own or sometimes they'll hire someone. When there's change at the top, just like you saw from your dad's company, there's a common conception, or I believe misconception, that people resist change. People resist change. That's what I hear all the time. And I tell people that's a misunderstanding of human behavior. People don't resist change. People resist loss. There's a difference. People don't resist change. They resist loss. As an example, if you go to a person who makes $50,000 a year and you say to that person, congratulations, your new salary is $100,000 a year. That's a change most people won't resist. Yeah. People don't resist change. They resist loss. So they were afraid of losing, and they learned to trust you, Bobby. They learned to trust you, and their fear was decreased because of it.
So, I think that's really interesting. And I'd love to talk a little bit more about that change component, because people do seem to resist change when it takes them off of their normal comfort or their normal course of action, and they now have to do something different. To some, that's super exciting. To others, it's like nails on a chalkboard.
It's not losing. It's not fear of loss. It's not change. It's fear of loss. Losing influence, power, control, authority, competence, comfort, certainty, predictability. There are all sorts of psychological losses that people experience or fear during periods of change. So that's what you're talking about. You mentioned one of them, but that's exactly it. It's like, even if you assure them, look, you'll keep your job, we're all in it together. You need, as leaders, we need to be able to address fear of loss if we're ever going to overcome resistance. It's the only way. And we address it as you did, head on. Look, I just need you to focus on these KPIs, make sure, because that's clarity, Bobby. You were giving them clarity. Go ahead.
How do you deal with, because you are going to, I'm sure business owners that are listening right now have dealt with people in their organization that are just not as adopting of change, that fear of loss of the, 7 different adjectives or words that you used. But how do you get around that other than, the example of me barreling through and just saying, hey, trust me, this is what you have to do. Here's some clarity. Like, how do you, if you're looking at building a culture and you want some of those people who are not really, they might be great at what they do, but they're just a little resistant or a lot of resistance to change. How do you open up that new third eye for them so they see the world in a different light?
I think you use the word, there is no over, under, around, there is only through. And the only way through is by being able to speak to them around what is it you're really afraid of, and be able to comfort them with, we're all in this together. This is because some people are afraid of losing, for example, their reputation. They've worked a long time. They know how to do things. So it's a reputation. For some people, it's comfort. I've been using this computer program for 10 years. Now you're changing it up on me. So that's comfort. There are all sorts of things people are afraid of losing. The only way through is to be able to identify it with them and work through it with them. Saying to them, again, we're all together. This is a process for all of us. We believe that we are all going to make it through. I have every confidence that you can make it through, and we're going to help you do it.
What do you see as the biggest, the biggest driver of resistance to change? What do you see that most people struggle with in that process?
I'm going to go back to some factor of loss. What are they afraid of losing? And here's the thing, it's not even actual loss, it's perceived loss or potential loss. Just the possibility will bring up resistance. So for us as leaders, it's really about asking that question. And there are lots of ways to ask it. You can ask it directly, because some people say nothing. Well, what are you uncomfortable with? Well, sometimes you got to dig for it. Some people don't have enough self-awareness to really experience it, so you got to dig for it. But what I'm saying, as a leader, you don't quit until you get that answer or some semblance of an answer that makes sense. What are they afraid of losing?
So let's say we're trying to gauge, and we've got a scale. Maybe the scale is 1 to 10, and we're trying to gauge what our culture is. What are some of the key elements that you look to help companies realize when they're gauging their progress or how good their culture is? Again,
I think it depends on the beliefs of the company. But let's just take, rather than abstract, let's take a common belief, which if people don't have it, we try and bring it into culture. That is one of human connection. So when you're talking about, people getting along with one another, people collaborating, that's all about human connection internally. When you're talking about caring about when you said the client doesn't come first, you come first, that's you being connected to them. That's also them being connected to each other. And then when you talk about, well, I want my clients to feel part of the family, that's you connecting to your clients. So I would describe it as culture facing inward with your employees and culture facing outward with your clients and customers. So culture does indeed go in both directions. So let's talk about human connection. If that is a belief, which clearly I believe is one of yours, that it's important for your people to connect with each other and with your customers, what behaviors align with that? What behaviors display that? What behaviors are evidence of that? And what behaviors are excluded? So for example, if connection is important, how people talk to one another is also important. Now, let me be clear. Banks have a very different culture than advertising agencies. That's just a compare and contrast. Advertising agencies tend to have, let's call it, more bandwidth of what's allowed. They allow a broader range of expression than the bank. Regardless of how things are expressed, do people genuinely take an interest in one another? How do I look at that? I look for, what do the side conversations look like? Do they have side conversations? Are they talking about work? Do they ever talk about their children, their families, things going on in their outside world? Those are the things that I want to look at. So when I go into a business meeting like where we met, I'm there early. And I'm always listening to what type of conversations the members are having, because I can tell in the first 30 seconds what type of group it's going to be, what type of day it's going to be based on the conversations I hear in the room.
That's interesting. Now you had listed out the 4 elements, and one of them is, I guess, consistency.
No, beliefs, behavior, rules, traditions, and rituals. Those 4?
Rituals, not consistency, but rituals. And you had an interesting exercise. I'd love for you to kind of go through the exercise where you had us repeat, and I feel like an idiot now because I don't remember what the word was.
No. Listos en adelante. Listos en adelante. Yeah.
I'd love for you to go through like the purpose of that and just even use the group as an example, or use the most recent group that you've had, because I found that to made me think about things a little differently.
Oh, I'm glad. Thank you. Thanks for saying that. So, so what you're talking about is if you remember, there was a 4-step process that we use to create culture shift. And I do it in presentations. It's the same 4-step process that we use when it comes to creating culture shift in any organization. Number 1 is to display the behavior. That means we must go first. As leaders, we must display the behavior first. Very good. That was the other one, raising your non-dominant hand. Very good. Yeah, that was the other one. So we display the behavior first, number 1. Number 2, you must have your employees experience the behavior. Number 3, you want to ritualize the behavior. And number 4, you want to monitor the behavior over time. So with those 4 steps in the presentation, what we did, I created a culture shift by introducing 2 new behaviors. One is non-dominant hand, if you remember that one, raising your non-dominant hand, what you just showed. And the other is Listos Adelante. And the idea was, after every section, I would say, any questions? And I would say, no questions. Then I say, Listos, which is a Spanish word that means ready, understand, clear. And then the group has to respond in unison, Adelante. Right. And the key here, part of the key, one very important one, when I said, culture is not only what's required, culture is what's allowed, the behaviors that are excluded. If you allow for backsliding, you're going to get backsliding, if you remember that. So with the Listos Adelante, we set a standard up at the top, and I'm very rigid about maintaining the standard of performance, because part of ritualization is accountability. You can't ritualize behavior without accountability.
So can we take a real life example in how a business owner can kind of set that up, or how do you want to talk that through? How do you think that we can get that example through to explain it?
So part of ritualization is rewarding high performers for me. So I think another piece I talk about in a presentation is fairness is not sameness. Okay. Fairness is not sameness means just because 2 teams are doing the same work, if they're doing at different levels, they shouldn't be given the same reward. Now, historically, companies use money to reward, bonuses and the like. It's not that I'm opposed to money, is that money as a reward has very short legs, meaning once it's spent, it's gone.
Yeah.
I like to leverage cultural rewards. Cultural rewards are anything that can be given, it must be sustained, or it will be taken away. So as an example, Specific example, client we're working with right now. They have lots of KPIs. One of the KPIs they have is utilization. They have a utilization metric. They have two teams. Their standard for utilization is 80%. They have one team performing at 90%. They have one team performing at 70%. They're doing the same work, 20 points apart in utilization. Should they be given the same reward?
No.
Absolutely not.
Especially
Absolutely not.
since one group isn't meeting the minimum.
That's exactly right. So here's what we did. We went to the team that was performing at 90%. We said, well, we'd like to do something a little special for you because you guys are really killing it. So we worked with them to create a system of flexibility where, and we created it, we tested it, it worked beautifully. By the way, their utilization went up to 93%, but that's an aside because here's what really happened, or here's what happened in addition to that. They started coming in late, leaving early. Different ones. Some would come in late, others would leave early. Some would come in late, others would leave early. What do you think is the first thing we heard from the team that was performing at 70%? What did they say?
Why do they get the opportunity and they're going to end up crashing?
That came second. I heard it. I think Jessica said it.
I said it. It's not fair.
That's not fair, in a very loud and angry tone. That's exactly right, Jessica. You nailed it. That's not fair. Now, here's the beauty of cultural reward. This is what allowed us to go to them and be the team that was performing at 70%. Go to them and begin to discuss performance in a collaborative rather than punitive way. Here's how that discussion went. It's really interesting that you should notice this group over here is coming in late, leaving early, because when we go to our transparent dashboard of performance, transparency is part of trust and strong cultures. When we go to our transparent dashboard of performance, you can see they're performing at 90% when you guys are performing at 70% when our standard is 80%. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure if you're aware, but that type of flexibility is available to any team that's performing at 85% or better. So let's talk together about what we can do collaboratively to get you and your team from the 70% where you are to the 80%, which is where we'd like you to be, to the 85%, which is where you'd like to be in order to enjoy all that delicious flexibility you see them enjoy.
How long did it take them to get from 70 to 85?
30 to 45 days, not more than that. They had some what I would call technical training issues that need to take place. But once we got those out, they just weren't interested in it before.
That's something that you work through. I mean, a lot of people talk about the 5 love languages of business, right?
Yeah.
Is that mm-hmm. part of the conversation of finding out what really means the most to them? Are you taking, how would a business owner approach what the benefit's going to be without implementing something that they think would be beneficial without conversing with the team?
Well, I think you should always converse with the team.
Right.
So any culture shift we use always starts with talk to your people. You got it. Look, there are some what we call universal drivers. So one of them is connection. Human beings need connection. Another is purpose. Human beings want to belong to something larger than themselves. Another is autonomy. So people want to have control over their schedule. And that's what flexibility offers. This is another piece. What you hear, the narrative is a future workforce is hybrid. Future hybrid is what you hear. It's not going to be hybrid. It's going to be flexible. Hybrid is just one type of flexibility. And I'll just give you the example as to why. There are some industries, Bobby, that just don't lend themselves to hybrid work. Construction, manufacturing, hospitals, right. They don't lend themselves to hybrid work, but they still lend themselves to flexibility. And that's one thing every human being wants.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we do here, and I've had this conversation since employee one, and we have it all the time, is, hey, listen, at the end of the day, the work just has to be done. So we all have families. Some of us don't have kids yet. Some of us have personal lives that we want to attend to, certain events. And it's not a matter of saying you can't do that because of no really good reason. It's a matter of, okay, what is it that you need to get done? And how do you get it done so that this way you can enjoy that flexibility?
And that is why you have a stellar company, because that is a perspective that is A, non-traditional, and B, typically not held by, let's call it, more senior CEOs who, again, like your dad, command and control. It gives up command and control for looking at outcome. And that's what a lot of people are uncomfortable with.
You say for my dad, but I really think that things work differently in different eras. And I think something that worked, in the 80s, 90s, and and maybe even into 2000s just isn't, we're not in the same environment. Talk to us a little bit about just your work in dealing with companies and that age shift, or the mindset shift in ages or generations across businesses like that.
Yeah, that's another area we do a lot of work in, is how to maximize performance in a multi-generational workforce. So let's talk about, the key generations that are currently in the workforce. There are some tail end of the silent generation. Silent generation was born 25 to 45, which makes them 80 to 100, but there are very few remaining. Baby boomers, okay? Baby boomers are born 1946 to 1964, which makes them this year between 61 and 79. These are the people who created the 70 to 80 hour work week.
Mm-hmm.
And they created it because they wanted to distinguish themselves by having a stellar career, which was about material and financial acquisition.
Well, they also did not quite have the same efficiencies that we have today with the ability to travel with a computer in our pocket and reach all people at all times.
100%.
So it was also a different, they had a different environment in which they could work in.
That's true. Part of that different environment was at their peak, there were 84 million baby boomers. There were more people than jobs available. So boomers had to flex to the workforce. They did so by creating the 70 to 80 hour work week, being there before the boss, leaving after the boss. That was all them. The prior generation, silent generation, worked 9 to 5, 25 to 45 years for a single employer. That was a silent generation. Boomers came in and said, we want more. We want more. And that's how they distinguish themselves. More people than jobs. It was work. And to your point, they didn't have efficiency. They also didn't have the metrics. And I don't want to say they didn't care about them, but it was all about, it's referred to as FaceTime. FaceTime is the boomer belief that if you're not at work, if I can't see you doing work, then you must not be working. But again, to your point, that's a
dangerous assumption.
100%. It is today, maybe less so, but even still, 78 hours a week, that's what they created to distinguish themselves. Gen Xers, born 65 to 81, okay, which makes them this year between 54 and 60. Leading edge of Gen X is 60 this year. They came into the workforce and said, they wanted work-life balance. We don't want to work 70 to 80 hours a week. We want to work to live, not live to work.
Don't make me older than I really am, please.
But it is, well, how old are you, Bobby?
I'm 46.
Okay,
but
I'm
Gen X.
Yeah. 44 to 60. You're a young Gen Xer. I'm 57. I'm on the opposite end. We're in the same generation, just at opposite ends. 44 to 60 makes you Gen Xer. And then came millennials. So here's the key. 84 million boomers at their peak, 68 million Gen Xers. Gen Xers are a much smaller generation than boomers, followed by 79 million millennials. So as boomers have been retiring, all 84 million, and during the pandemic, and as many as 10,000 per day, Great Resignation was real, followed by 68 million Gen Xers. Today, there are more jobs than people available. So the workforce needs to flex to millennials and now Gen Zs. That's the rub with boomers, because boomers had to flex to the workforce. Now the workforce needs to flex to younger generations, and boomers don't like it.
So knowing that, what are some of the key components to culture that people who are maybe in this Gen X, our generation, prime earning years of our lives, so to speak, what are we missing?
I think that Gen Xers are an interesting generation. Again, I'm one of us. I think you have Gen Xers that behave like boomers and Gen Xers who are more flexible and behave like millennials, especially around time at work. I'm going to come back to flexibility here, because what is currently being referred to as the hybrid workforce, I talk about as the flexible workforce, because not everything lends itself to hybrid. That work, there is no standard post-pandemic. We don't know where this is going to land. We have companies that are pushing for people to come back to work, and we have companies that are giving flexibility. But that work culture will be created by and for millennials and Gen Zs.
Well, it's super interesting. When I look back, it was always the successful, and they were mostly, successful guys.
Mm-hmm.
They're overweight, they're huffing and puffing, And now it's the successful guys are ripped and they're promoting this like athleisure kind of lifestyle.
I love it. Yeah.
And, I look at my dad, right? My dad was a not fit man. He, after high school sports, he dedicated his life to work. And, the unfortunate part is that works against longevity.
Yeah.
And I look at my lifestyle, and I used to be more that way. And over the years, I will call it evolution because I think it's evolved. I've evolved to, really understanding that there needs to be a little bit more balance in my life. And I don't know if the driver was that my own success provided me with a different level of clarity, because when you're still fighting for success, it's very hard to get that clarity. But talk to me a little bit. I think you call it the Healthspan philosophy.
Right.
How do you see that playing into just the general culture of business and how to run your company?
So I think that, going back to baby boomers, like you described your father, he wasn't particularly healthy because when you're working 70 to 80 hours a week, there's not a lot of time to take care of yourself. So extras, and particularly I would say post-pandemic, I think people have realized there are other things they've reprioritized. I think people are willing to make less. That's part one, post-pandemic. But number two, it's even before the pandemic, it was about let's measure performance, not time at work. What you're saying, you give your people a list of things to do, they get them done. And you care less about where they get them done, then they get them done. That's the priority.
For some people, it's like a sickness. For some people, it's like they just can't because it's so ingrained in how they identify with their time or how they identify their time as having value. How do you get somebody to reframe that?
So first, I think you need to always remember there's an old joke in psychology. How many psychologists does it take to change a light bulb? The answer is it takes only one, but the light bulb has to really want to change. Okay?
That is so lame, but I love it.
Yeah, it's a dad joke. I know. I get it. The point is you can't change people against their will. So my point to you is that they can only change that if they want to change it, Bobby. They can only change it if they want to change it. Some people have no interest in changing. I'm not going to waste my time and energy on someone who isn't interested in changing. Now, if somebody's saying, you know what, I've been working 70 to 80 hours a week. It has affected my health, my relationships with my spouse, my relationships with my children. That's somebody who wants to change. If somebody comes and says, you know what, I have a toxic culture and I want to change it and I've been driving it, help me because I'm willing to change it. That's an entirely different story as opposed to, I'm good. I'm super successful. I'm surrounded by money. I've created this trust fund for my kids. Fantastic. If that's what you want, go for it. I have no interest in changing someone who's not interested in changing.
We see that a lot with clients, and we get clients each end of that spectrum, right? Ones that are super flexible and focus on their culture and create their own space and almost, you look at them and you go, how do you fit that all in? All the way to the other end of the pendulum that, literally wake up, work, go to sleep, wake up, work, go to sleep, wake up, work, go to sleep. And no matter how much we try to even dig into what is it that they want out of life, even when they tell us what they want and it's in direct conflict with their actions, it's very hard to get them to commit to any sort of change. Because it's almost like, but it works. And what if I change and that doesn't work? Fear of loss. Oh my God, we're back to the beginning.
Love it. You nailed it. That's exactly right. What if it doesn't work? Then I will lose something. You got it.
Because I don't know very many people who are okay with making less money for flexibility. I think everybody wants that status quo plus.
I think that's a broad brushstroke that may be true until they realize that the money they have, a lot of what they have may not be necessary for them. For some it may be, but for others it's not. And my experience has been, particularly with younger generations, they're willing to give up more money for greater autonomy. They still want to be paid fairly. I want to be clear. And this does not mean you can underpay your people, but young people in particular, and some people who are our age will give up money for greater autonomy, the ability to make choices that impact our lives. That's autonomy.
And I guess the process is just asking, what
That's
is it that is most
That's
valuable
right.
to you?
Human beings want agency. You can't figure out what gives them agency without asking. And that's the, again, ability to make decisions that impact our lives. That's agency.
Hey, Dr. Gustavo, it's producer Jess stepping in. I have a question for our
Sure.
business owner clients. How can they tell if they have a good culture or not? I would assume a lot of people just assume that they're doing things the right way and their culture is fine. But is there a way that they can gauge and know for sure, like if their culture is good or bad?
So there are several elements that we look at. I mentioned one around relationships, how people communicate with one another. So do they have non-work related conversations? Or are they just talking about work? So that human connection. Another one, Jess, is trust. Do people display trust in one another? Are they willing to take risks with one another? So for us, we talk about, there's a formula for trust that comes from a psychologist out of the University of Indiana named Mishra. Requires 4 behaviors: reliability, openness, competence, and concern. So those are the 4 behaviors we look at, and how are those displayed? We also, when we're working with organizations, we also look for, on an individual basis. Some people have hot buttons, which means they're super sensitive to one of those 4 behaviors. Others have blind spots, which means they don't care about one of those 4 behaviors. So we look for where there's a conflict. So for example, if I'm reporting to you, you're my supervisor, and you have a blind spot of concern, which means you don't need to see concern, you don't care about concern, which means you're less likely to offer it concern. And my hot button's concern, that's the one I most care about. Well, if it's your blind spot and it's my hot button, you think there's going to be a rub? 100% of the time.
I think most companies, like most people, they think that they're snowflakes. Right. We are just, and I mean it not in the woke term, but in the, the uniqueness of themselves. What would you say to a business owner that would say, hey, listen, you just don't understand my business and how we work? Now, obviously, it sounds like your approach is very tailored. It's very customized. It's not like, here's the playbook, go after it. You really have to understand who are the driving forces in the business in terms of who are the employees that have influence, what are the conversations that are happening outside, what are the subcultures, how do we dive in deeper to take a look at where you currently are so we can evolve to something that's going to be a little bit more of a positive and energetic culture that you're looking for, if that's what you're looking for.
Or there are no cookie cutter cultures from my perspective. I do think it's customized. At the same time, we leverage what we consider things that are primary human drives. So we know that regardless of what shape you are as a snowflake, there are certain things that human beings want. That is connection to each other. That is us to belong to something larger than ourselves. So we leverage a great deal. What we talk about is cause, because most companies focus on vision, values, and mission statements.
That purpose piece that we were talking about before. Yep.
Yeah, you nailed it. That's exactly right. Yeah. So that's a primary human drive. We talk about trust. We talk about how people look at time and decision making. So there are lots of things that people will have individual differences, and I don't want to diminish those. At the same time, there are some pretty big levers that as leaders we can pull that will motivate groups of people. And here's the other piece. We move away from individual performance metrics and move to team-based metrics. Because when people are connected to each other, part of something larger than themselves, they don't want to let down their peers, because they're connected to them. We don't want to let down our friends. We don't want to let down people we see every day and work with every day and are connected to. So team-based metrics drive performance upward in what we call an upward spiral of performance. The team continues to drive its performance upward when you give it a cultural reward like flexibility or autonomy.
So that's interesting, because we talk about 1 + 1 having to equal 11 and not 2. And usually in a team format, if there's somebody that is dragging behind, if it's not something that's happening to them personally, and the team is willing to make up for them, because we all as a team at one point or another are going to have to carry somebody when they're just maybe in some sort of a lull or something's happening in their lives. But the anticipation is that they come out. If they don't ever come out of that, that's a really good way to also dictate who belongs on the bus and who doesn't.
Right. The peers identify it before the supervisor ever does. And here's what I've seen in that scenario specifically. Everyone goes through a lull, whether it's a sick child, divorce, whatever it is, that's a lull, and performance comes back up. But if their performance does not come back up, first the team will talk to them, try and get the performance up. But if not, if it doesn't come up, then they will either pull themselves out because they're harming people they care about. They will self-select out, or they will be pushed out.
I think about it like as an individual, if I'm being gauged on my individual metric and something's happening in my life, I can only imagine how depressing that will feel if I'm underperforming, because I'm the only one who's going to dictate my success on whatever the KPI or measurement that I'm being, my results are being measured against. But if I have the team, that community feeling,
Very good.
I mean, they always say it takes a village, right? It takes a village to raise a kid. It takes a village to whatever, build a business, etc. That's a really interesting perspective, because I think that a lot of people miss that.
100%. It's all about team or group dynamics. You're leveraging team dynamics for high performance, and that's the only way to get 1 + 1 = 11, because you're having people collaborate.
So I have a question. What got you so inspired as this to be your purpose? Going around and the talks that you've done, the TEDx's that you've done, the people that you've helped, the companies you've worked with, what was your moment where you said, this is my calling, this is what I need to do?
So I would say the thing that moved me towards culture was the prison riot, which I shared at the top, because that was a life-changing event for me. I mean, I seriously could have been killed. So I certainly would have been injured. There were other inmates trying to reach me because they wanted to use me as a chip, a negotiating chip. And these guys were protecting me. So that was clearly something that changed my view of humanity, because again, I'm not a mobster. I've never been a mobster. There was no reason they need to protect me. They did because of my connection with Tony. So that was a shift. That was an event, I would say, made me look at what was that about, because when it happened, I really didn't understand it. I was really shocked by it and surprised by it. And it took me several weeks to kind of process it and understand it. What moved me into speaking was really that you're part of a Vistage group. So there was a Vistage chair back in 2010 who one of his members sadly had committed suicide, and the group was very affected by it. And he asked me to come as a psychologist. He asked me to come in and talk to the group about it. And that's when I learned what Vistage was. And so he had 3 groups. So for 2 groups, I did a generation presentation. And for that specific group, what I did was I did on emotional intelligence, which is another area that I focused on for years, but I really focused on suicide and suicide prevention. And my goal was to relieve them of the guilt, because, Vistage groups get very close. So they had a lot of guilt around how come we didn't know, how come we didn't see, how is this possible, et cetera. It was a very, very traumatic experience for all of them.
That's got to be rewarding, but also, I mean, quite taxing to have conversations like that and be that type of person in someone's life. Was part of it that psychology for you to, it's a lot easier to talk about business culture than it is about something as traumatic as suicide, or did that weigh into your decision?
I like to describe it this way. Clinical psychology is about getting people who function below normal limits to function at normal limits. Organizational business psychology is about getting people to function at normal limits to function at exceptional limits. And that for me is just much more exciting. To get people to work collaboratively in ways they otherwise wouldn't work, to achieve things that no one else could achieve, that's much more exciting to me.
So listen, I appreciate your time. I know we're turning on the hour here. If you were to leave our audience with maybe 2 or 3 thoughts, what would that be?
Okay, these are things that I've learned from my studies and kind of learned along the way. There's a Buddhist saying I like a great deal. There are 3 things that cannot long be hidden: the sun, the moon, and the truth. So that has led me to find ways to communicate clearly, kindly, clearly, but accurately. So don't hide the truth. That's number 1. Number 2, the greatest gift you can give another is the purity of attention, the purity of your own attention. So notice, I don't during presentations, or personal conversations. I'm not somebody who has their phone. I don't look down at my phone. If I'm in a conversation with you, whether it's on a podcast or in person, I'm not looking at my phone. That's purity of attention. Number 3, I learned from a supervisor when I was doing clinical work, always limit adversarial relationships. So I try to always, and you said this earlier, you want good relationships with, when you were going to Dunkin', you're the person from Dunkin'. You always want to make sure that, you're not harming people along the way, limiting adversarial relationships. So those would be I would say 3 guiding principles that have guided me through business and in life.
I love those. So for those of us business owners that may be looking at our culture and saying, hey, I like what Dr. Gus has to say. I would really love to figure out, where we have some opportunities, because maybe their sites for their organization is bigger than where they are now. And they notice that their people is something that they want to reinvest in. How do they find you?
Best way is my website. It's www.drgustavo.com, spelled DRGUSTAVO.com, drgustavo.com.
And we'll have that all in the notes too. So this way people can reach out directly. And obviously if they have any questions, they'll reach out to us as well, and we'll make sure that we make the connection. But I think I love the work that you're doing is, I think that there's a tremendous amount of value. You look at the idea of, we were talking about baby boomers, and 61 is the lowest age.
That's
and
right.
We talk about how in 2030, every baby boomer is going to be over the age of 65.
Mm-hmm.
And if we start to look at that culture shift of just the difference in way generations look at how to run a business, there's a lot of opportunity to start to adapt and evolve, so that this way, if you're an older person that is looking to potentially exit, you're going to be exiting at a higher value because you've created that culture. You've re-examined what it is that you're doing in your 4 walls, or, whatever the environment is in your company, to then prep it so the next generation can come in and successfully keep the continuity of that business going. And if you're younger, it's how do you evolve and maybe think about things if you were learning under the old world order, and you see some of these people who are successful and they're in good shape and they're running around and they're spending time with their kids and they're going on vacation. You're going, how the hell do they do that? I think that's a really good moment to kind of take a step back and reassess and reevaluate how you're doing things in your 4 walls, and how do the people that work with you and for you look at their role and their mission and their purpose.
Couldn't agree more. The answer to me is always, it's going to be your culture. That's
For
what
me,
people
it's
are buying.
called Dr. Gus.